Jesus Christ of Nazareth. He is God. He created you, and He created me. It's Jesus. He is the Messiah. History isn't just written, it's sculpted. Over the centuries, people have preserved His legacy through figurines and sculptures meant to represent Him. But all of that might have just changed forever. Imagine this. If Jesus is truly saving people, who would dare stand in His way? Yet Elon Musk has made a bold claim that challenges centuries of tradition. Musk asserts, with what he calls proof, that Jesus was black. This revelation has sent shockwaves through religious and historical circles. Could the face you've been taught to revere your entire life be a lie? What is Elon Musk's evidence? And why has Jesus' image been rewritten so drastically over time? Stick with us as we unpack this controversial topic and examine Musk's proof that Jesus is black. Elon Musk has been no stranger to making headlines, but his recent statements about Jesus have sparked unprecedented debate. Musk claims that Jesus was black and that his claim is supported by the Bible itself. He points specifically to the book of Daniel, where it describes the hair of the one to come as being like pure wool. Many have interpreted this to mean Jesus' hair was kinky or textured. Musk also references the book of Revelation, which describes Jesus' feet as being like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace, a phrase that many believe suggests he had brown or dark skin. Joan Taylor, author of What Did Jesus Look Like?, supports this notion, stating that Jesus likely resembled modern-day people from the Middle East, with dark brown hair, olive skin, and features resembling those of the ancient Israelite population. According to her, Jesus was far from the blonde-haired, blue-eyed figure we often see in Western depictions. But this raises important questions. Was this misrepresentation intentional? When and why did Jesus' image change so dramatically? What you're about to hear could challenge everything you've ever believed about Jesus' appearance. For centuries, history has overlooked the contributions of black people to humanity, and many argue it has also ignored the true origins of Jesus. While the Bible does not provide a direct description of Jesus' race or skin color, it leaves behind enough clues to paint a clearer picture. Revelation 1:16, for example, states that his feet were like burnished bronze refined in a furnace. If you're unfamiliar, bronze is naturally brown, and when heated, it takes on an even darker hue. Now, skeptics might argue that modern Middle Eastern or Arabic people, who also live in desert climates, have brownish complexions, but their skin tone doesn't match the deep metallic color of burnished bronze. If Jesus were Middle Eastern in the way people understand it today, wouldn't his feet have been described as ivory or some shade of off-white? This discrepancy has led some to assert that Jesus was of African descent, as people of African heritage are known to have darker skin due to the natural production of melanin, especially when exposed to prolonged sunlight. To go further, let's revisit Revelation 1:13-14. And in the midst of the lampstands, one like a son of man, clothed with a long robe and a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white, like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. Notice how his hair is described as like wool. This is a texture commonly associated with black people. In contrast, the hair of Asians and Europeans is typically long, flowing, and wavy. Yet, in most portrayals of Jesus today, he is shown with blonde, wavy hair that doesn't match this biblical description at all. The Bible doesn't stop there. In Daniel 10:5-6, we find another vision of Jesus. I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a man clothed in linen. with a belt of fine gold from Upaz around his waist. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like the sound of a multitude. Once again, his arms and legs, key features of his physical appearance, are described as being the color of burnished bronze. Think about that. It's not just his feet, it's his entire body. The imagery here aligns with a darker-skinned individual, challenging the predominantly white images of Jesus that have been perpetuated for centuries. This reinterpretation isn't just a modern discussion, it's one rooted in biblical text. And yet, these descriptions have often been overlooked or ignored. The Bible has been around for thousands of years, but many of its deeper truths seem to have been hiding in plain sight. Take the phrase, hair like wool. How many people have truly stopped to consider its meaning, or the repeated references to bronze? Why have these details been dismissed or reinterpreted to fit a European aesthetic? Could it be that history, as we've been taught, was written by those with an agenda? These questions are stirring a larger movement. Many are calling for the black race to reclaim its place in history. Jesus' potential African heritage could represent a shift in how people see not only religion, but also the cultural contributions of African-descended peoples throughout time. For far too long, black excellence has been erased or diminished in the story of humanity. If Jesus himself was black, this revelation could restore a sense of pride and identity to millions worldwide. But this discussion isn't without its controversy. Some argue that Jesus' race doesn't matter, that his teachings and sacrifice transcend physical appearance. Yet for others, especially those who have faced racial discrimination or historical erasure, knowing the truth about Jesus' identity is deeply significant. It's about representation, dignity, and correcting historical inaccuracies. At the end of the day, the Bible leaves enough clues for us to ponder. It's not about rewriting the Bible or inventing new truths. It's about seeking answers in what has already been written. As Elon Musk's claims circulate, they provoke us to look deeper, not just at the scriptures, but also at the broader implications of how Jesus has been portrayed for generations. This isn't just a story about religion. It's a story about truth, identity, and history. And the question remains, what will we do with this knowledge? Will it bring us closer to the truth of who Jesus really was, or will it spark further division? One thing is certain, the conversation has only just begun. The hips, feet, and arms are the upper limbs extending from the shoulders to the hands. This passage describes both the arms and legs as burnished bronze. We know that a person's arms and legs are typically the same color as the rest of the body, which strongly suggests that Jesus was a black man. This is not mentioned just once in the Bible, but several times. Different biblical figures describe his feet as brown or bronze in color. Another significant clue is found in Genesis 49:10 through 12, part of the early biblical prophecy about the coming of Christ. This passage mentions that the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him. It continues by describing how he will receive the obedience of the people, bind his foal to the vine, and wash his garments in wine, and his vesture in the blood of grapes. The most telling detail is that his eyes are described as darker than wine. While dark eyes are common among all races, this challenges the long-standing image of a blue-eyed Jesus that has been widely accepted for centuries. In 1 Corinthians 11:14, the Bible also states that nature itself teaches that long hair is disgraceful for a man. This passage highlights that long hair was seen as unnatural for ancient Hebrews, and any attempts to artificially elongate the hair were considered to be going against the natural woolly texture of their hair. Even more intriguing is that the Bible gives no indication of Jesus having Caucasoid or European features. The portrayal of Jesus and the ancient Hebrews as white became more common during the Renaissance period, spanning from the 14th to the 17th centuries. During this time, artists began depicting biblical figures with white skin. Unfortunately, this image of Jesus has persisted, despite evidence from the Bible that suggests a very different appearance. Based on biblical descriptions, it is much more accurate to say that Jesus Christ was black, rather than attributing him to any other race. There is a significant amount of historical evidence and iconography that supports the depiction of Jesus as black. The tradition of black Jesus icons dates back to the 14th century and has been preserved through time. These icons depict predominantly black figures, marking a notable departure from the common European images of Jesus and his followers. Museums have played an essential role in preserving these artworks. One of the oldest known images of Christ, discovered in Syria around 235 AD, after the death of Christ, shows him with short, woolly hair and dark skin. This starkly contrasts with the widely accepted Western portrayal of Jesus as a fair-skinned man with wavy brown or blonde hair and blue eyes. The biblical world existed before the era of color prejudice, when black people were treated with great respect. Jesus, who represents all races, had to belong to one particular race, but historical facts suggest that Jesus was black. This is where things become even more fascinating. The world during his time was multicultural, but one of the great tragedies of the past 400 years has been the rise of white supremacy, particularly by Europeans and white Americans. They took control of cultural imagery, altering the portrayal of important figures. During a visit to the Solovetsky Monastery, sacred and secular images were reworked to depict figures as white, turning black into a negative and subjugated symbol. In an interesting historical turn, a black Jesus icon from the 16th century was presented to Vladimir Putin, which sparked his interest in these unique religious artifacts. This led to further efforts to preserve and promote them in Russia. Putin has strongly supported the recognition of black Jesus icons, understanding their cultural and religious significance. His efforts have helped restore and bring these ancient icons into public awareness, shedding light on their important role in Russia's heritage. Only when we learned how to peel back the dark layers beneath the surface did the true beauty emerge. This deeper understanding made these images more visible and appreciated. Even surprising figures like Andrei Matis, who was in Moscow at the time. He once said that to understand the historical context of black Jesus icons, artists should come to Moscow to learn, not Italy. To understand this, we need to step back in time and explore early Christian art and the rejection of religious images during the first centuries of Christianity. Aniconism, the rejection of religious images, had a significant influence on Christian art. It is important to understand how black African depictions of Jesus became the pale-skinned, blonde, blue-eyed image used to serve white supremacy. Some believe that Emperor Constantine, after making Christianity the official religion at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, launched a campaign to erase all black images of Jesus. Before Constantine, however, Christians of all races had already embraced the faith. Figures like Simon of Cyrene, Simeon called Niger, Rufus, Alexander, and John Dada, the Ethiopian eunuch, are mentioned in the Bible. Their icons, which feature them as dark-skinned, are even displayed today in places like a Russian Orthodox church in Michigan. Saints and martyrs such as Perpetua and Felicity, Mary of Egypt, Anthony the Great, and Cyprian of Carthage were revered for their faith, and many were depicted as black. It is hard to believe that Constantine, who ruled a multiracial empire, would have simply dismissed the legitimacy of black Christian images. Listening to a Christological debate between two black men, yet deciding their holy images should be erased, does not seem like a legitimate course of action. In fact, black images of Christ, Mary, and the saints were not rare or unusual in the Orthodox Church. The Copts in Egypt, the Ethiopians, and even Greeks, slaves, and Italians had these images in their churches, placed right alongside their most cherished icons. However, when Muslims conquered the Byzantine East, the African Christian world became cut off from their European counterparts. As a result, Eastern Europeans and Catholics began painting biblical characters to resemble themselves. But here's the important distinction. This was not about racial supremacy, at least not until the transatlantic slave trade began in the 15th century, long after Constantine's reign. It was only when radical reformers broke away from the Roman Catholic Church that they made a deliberate point of destroying icons, including non-European depictions of Christ, Mary, and the saints. In the United States, where the practice of iconoclasm was widespread among Protestants, ancient black images of Christ would not be accepted in a slaveholding segregationist society. But Orthodox immigrants held on to some of these images and even painted them in their churches. A notable example is the image of Saint Moses at the Holy Trinity Monastery in Jordanville, New York. But let's be real. Orthodox Christians were a small portion of the immigrant population in America, and their communities did not mix much with the wider culture. So blaming Constantine for the erasure of black images just doesn't hold up. However, black images of Christ and the saints did not disappear completely. In fact, they remained present, even more prominent in some circles. If you visit most Orthodox churches, you will still find full-sized icons of Mary and Jesus, depicted with brown skin, resembling figures like Drake or Lawrence Fishburne. Their hair might be long and brown, but these icons are far from the image of the truck-stop Jesus that is often portrayed. My first encounter with Orthodox Christianity at St. Cyprian of Carthage in Richmond, Virginia, revealed Christ and his mother depicted as darker than the lighter-skinned people nearby. The icons of St. Cyprian and Moses looked almost like they could be paintings of a father and son. Similarly, at the Holy Cross Monastery in Wayne, West Virginia, you can see an icon of Mary and the child Jesus with very dark skin. The icon of Mary of Egypt is also venerated by Orthodox Christians. Outside of Eastern Orthodoxy, the Copts and Ethiopians continue to venerate black images of Jesus and the saints that Constantine allegedly sought to destroy, instead of perpetuating the myth that Constantine whitewashed Christianity. African Americans should visit Coptic and Ethiopian churches to see for themselves that the Orthodox faith has never lost its African roots. In these churches, they will find a rich, unbroken tradition of faith and iconography that has always celebrated the African heritage of the church. By visiting these places, they can witness firsthand the enduring legacy of Black Christian imagery and the deep connections between the African roots of Christianity and the practices of the Orthodox Church. So, the next time someone tells you that black images of Christ and the saints were erased by Constantine, remember that the truth is far more complex and enduring. Eastern churches, like those of the Antiochian Greeks, Russians, and other Orthodox traditions, have long portrayed saints of all colors and races through their icons. While the Orthodox Church may not be perfect in its approach to race, there's no need to invent stories to make a point. The way Jesus' race was appropriated and altered is one of the biggest intellectual thefts in history. This shift began around the 4th century, when Christians started painting Jesus in the image of Greek and Roman gods to appeal to a broader audience. This was essentially a marketing strategy aimed at attracting more followers, but its consequences were deeply harmful. The second greatest trick of white supremacy was convincing us that the man who changed the world looked like a perfect blonde-haired, blue-eyed model. But that's not what Jesus looked like. In fact, he was likely a real, original soul brother, a man of color. The first trick of white supremacy, of course, was to make us believe that we were inferior, when, in truth, we are not. But the focus here is on how the portrayal of Jesus was altered. This change is significant because imagery matters. When people see others who look like them in powerful or beautiful positions, they feel validated and inspired, thinking they too can reach those heights. It's an affirming message. However, when millions of Christians around the world worship a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus, it lifts up only one kind of beauty, making whiteness seem superior, more important, more valuable. The truth, however, is clear. That image of Jesus is a lie. Jesus was black. Now let's address the elephant in the room. How did this appropriation happen? And what are its real-world consequences? While Jesus transcends race and skin color, the image of a white Jesus has tangible, lasting effects. If you close your eyes and picture Jesus, chances are you'll imagine a white man, blonde hair, blue eyes, without even realizing it. But this is problematic on multiple levels. Many have followed this white Jesus not just as a figure of religious devotion, but because this image has been so widely and deeply ingrained in Western culture. This version of Jesus is wrong, and more importantly, it prevents us from fully honoring the image of God in people who aren't white. Jesus likely had a darker skin tone, closer to the olive skin typical of Middle Eastern people today. Biblical scholar James Charlesworth even states that Jesus was likely dark brown and suntanned. The earliest depictions of Jesus showed him with a brown complexion and oriental features, but by the 6th century, Byzantine artists began portraying him with white skin, a beard, and hair parted in the middle. This became the standard image of Jesus, and during the colonial period, Western Europe spread this image across the world. It wasn't just a religious symbol. It shaped how millions of Christians understood Jesus' mission, ministry, and message. In the 19th century, some Christians who wanted to justify slavery worked hard to present Jesus as white. By ignoring his true identity as a dark-skinned, oppressed minority, slaveholders found it easier to justify the master-slave system and distort the true purpose of Jesus' mission. After all, Jesus came to set the oppressed free, as he proclaimed in Luke 4:18. This crucial aspect of his ministry was obscured by the adoption of a white, privileged Jesus, a Jesus who no longer seemed to align with the struggles of marginalized people. Some may argue that Jesus wasn't black or white, but simply a Jew, which is technically true. However, this argument misses a key point. As a Jew, Jesus was an ethnic minority in the Roman Empire. Jews were marginalized by the Romans, Greeks, and other powerful groups in many cities under imperial rule. As an infant, Jesus became the target of state-sanctioned infanticide, fleeing to Egypt as a refugee. He experienced firsthand the exploitation of Roman tax collectors and the oppression faced by his people. Throughout his life, Jesus understood what it was like to belong to a marginalized group whose culture, religion, and experiences were constantly sidelined. by those in power. Because Jesus was part of an ethnic minority, it challenges everyone to reconsider who he really was and whom he connected with during his earthly mission. When marginalized people gathered, Jesus was right there among them, not only because he came to help them, but because he too was one of them. He wasn't just helping the oppressed, he was identifying with them, living among them, and understanding their struggles as his own. This reality transforms our understanding of Jesus, his mission, and how we should engage with the marginalized in our own time. Jesus wasn't just a distant, idealized figure, but a person who walked in the shoes of the oppressed. His race, his identity, and his mission speak directly to the struggles of those who are sidelined, devalued, and ignored by society's power structures. Jesus is a model for justice, compassion, and solidarity with the marginalized, and we must reclaim his true identity, not just for historical accuracy, but for the sake of a deeper, more inclusive understanding of the gospel. Recognizing the true Jesus challenges us all to rethink our own perspectives, our priorities, and our commitments to justice and equality in the world today. Jesus didn't just care for the victims of Roman violence. He himself was a victim of it. He didn't only show concern for refugees. He was a refugee. He didn't just care for the poor. He was poor too. To Jesus, his ministry was deeply personal because he experienced firsthand the pain of being one of society's most marginalized people. His life wasn't just about how he appeared, but more about how he lived and died. He was a brother. He wasn't part of the dominant group. He was a revolutionary. Born into poverty, he was shut out from certain spaces. Jesus spent his life on the run. As a child, he had to flee his home country to escape a death sentence from a king who feared him. Throughout his life, he faced constant oppression, with authorities spying on him, chasing him down, and plotting against him. Despite all this, he still made time to share wisdom, to laugh, to enjoy wine with his friends. His story takes a dramatic turn when he is betrayed. Wrongfully arrested, he is lynched in front of a crowd. The circumstances surrounding his life and death reflect the oppression faced by countless marginalized people. This paints Jesus as an outsider, just as many others have been viewed throughout history. His story mirrors the Black experience, where the system oppresses and destroys those who try to change the world. Think of figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, and many others. When someone speaks out against injustice, the system tries to silence them. But just like those tragically lost in their communities, Jesus' image became iconic. His legacy spread across the world, even though he lived and died as an outsider. Yet, despite living the experience of the oppressed, Jesus is now often presented as the face of white supremacy. Imagery matters. The images we surround ourselves with carry deep meaning, and what we see shapes how we understand the world. If you are a Christian and wish to display an image of Jesus in your home, consider choosing a Black Jesus. Everyone deserves to see him as the beautiful Black man he was. He was a true revolutionary, rising from nothing to become brilliant, powerful, loved, feared, and ultimately unforgettable. He is one of the greatest figures in history, a man who showed the world how to live right. Would he support theft and injustice? Of course not. But when Christian leaders continue to promote the distorted, Europeanized image of Jesus, they are pushing a false narrative, a stolen image that perpetuates white supremacy. That image does not belong in your home. What do you think about the portrayal of Jesus as Black? Who do you believe is responsible for the misrepresentation of his race? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, be sure to check out the next video on your screen. You won't want to miss it.
Do you love meaningful Bible stories? Top 7 Bible Stories channel will bring you inspiration and peace every day. Don't forget to like and share your thoughts in the comments section. Your sharing is the motivation for us to bring more stories. Top 7 Bible Stories. Good stories, beautiful meanings.